Approaching the school, you will have the Gindie Hall and community mailboxes on your left. This hall was formerly the Gindie CWA Hall, but is now owned by the Central Highlands Has Talent Music Group. The post office was built by the community and mail is picked up and delivered daily. It is now owned by the music group but managed by the Gindie State School P&C. On your right, in the Samuel and Charlotte Daniels Memorial Park, is the shed provided by the Central Highlands Regional Council following the centenary in 1996 to house the restored 1911 Moggle tractor and other antique machinery. Turn left onto the highway, travel towards Emerald, then when safe to do so, turn into the driveway at the number 1 sign. Turn right in the driveway once in front of the house and drive along the side road near the tennis court fence.
Okay.
Portion 1, James William Jr.'s Gindie Jim Selection and Home. The older house was built for Gindie Jim, son of Jim Sr., on his original selection, Portion 1. For anyone who took the bus tour at the centenary in 1996, the older house was then further to the north. It is now mostly owned, rented out. When Gindie Jim's selection was sold, half was purchased by Frederick Samuel Daniels and the other half by George. It is now owned by descendants of Fred. The Gindie Racecourse was also in this vicinity. Portion 10, to the northeast of this block, not fronting the road, but adjoining his earlier selection, was selected by Walter Daniels sometime after the original selections. It is now part of Ivy Vale and owned by descendants of Fred.
Okay.
Previously portion 14, this is the site of 2 Gindie schools. The first opened in 1897 and built by Walter Daniels and the community, followed by the high-blocked second school, which was moved to be a scout hut. It can still be seen opposite the pool in Emerald. This portion number no longer exists and has been absorbed into the surrounding farmland. A football field was located in the paddock across the road opposite the school site. George Daniels' home and James Daniels Sr.'s homes were all built on the eastern side of J.W. Daniels Jr.'s Portion 1 selection. This site is inaccessible from Glenarena Road. The area where these homes were is now part of Ivyvale. The homes of John Daniels, son of George, and T.C. Daniels, son of James Sr., were also in this vicinity. T.C. Daniels' home was later moved to his property Glengallon area. T.C. was born at Glengallon on the Darling Downs. Portion 4, Davit, was the original selection of George Daniels. The name is now used for the home of Carolyn Daniels and her family. This site is also inaccessible from Glenarena Road. The origins of the majority of the Daniels property names are unknown, but there was a railway siding in the vicinity known as Devitt, which could have possibly inspired this name.
Right.
Portion 5. Ivy Vale was Walter Daniels' original selection and can be seen on both sides of the road. Walter's house was built on Ivy Vale. The timber from the home was recycled and used to build the house adjacent to the highway at Fernlees. Ivy Vale is the name currently used for the home of Margaret Daniels and her family and the property name of the descendants of Noel Daniels Sr., son of Fred Sr. Portion 6, which is on both sides of the road here, was the selection of Henry John Daniels, MLA. Although there are records of Henry visiting Gindie from time to time, he never actually relocated and built on his selection. This selection was named Riverley and is now owned by descendants of Fred. Properties Riversdale and Tin Hut formed portion 9, the selection of James Daniels Senior, which was known as Annie Vale. At the time of the centenary, the homes to your left were occupied by Jim Senior's descendants. They are now owned by descendants of Fred Daniels. This was the selection of George Henry G.H. Daniels. This portion 12 was not in the original group settlement selections, but selected just a few years later. G.H. never built on his selection. The area where the houses on the left-hand side of the road are would have been in the original portion 12 area, but are now on Enderley, owned by members of the Gardner family.
Right.
The remainder of portion 12, known as the boundary paddock, is now owned by descendants of Fred.
Okay.
Frederick Samuel Daniels' original selection, portion 8, also known as Over the Creek, is still owned by his descendants. Fred never built on this selection, which can be seen on both sides of Curls Road. Original selection, portion 7, is on both sides of the road ahead. Charles never built on his selection, but lived in the original Bellevue house. This property, however, now carries the Bellevue name. It is the only portion of the original group selection not currently owned by Daniels' descendants. Portion 2 was the original selection of Samuel Daniels, where the family initially camped around an old fernlings well. The Bellevue homestead was built on what was to become the eastern portion of this selection. Prior to its removal to Emerald, the Bellevue home was occupied by Charles Daniels, then his beneficiaries, members of the G.H. Daniels, son of James Senior family. The property is currently owned by members of the Fred Daniels family. The Bellevue name was transferred to Charles Daniels' portion 7 by his family beneficiaries, where it remains. When Don Daniels moved the Jarrett's Riverley home from Henry's portion 6 to the property you are now at, this property became known as Riverley. Don Daniels' family, descendants of Jim Senior, lived in this location until selling to descendants of Fred, who currently live here.
Right.
Side of the licence gate. The road that you have been driving on has always been access to the selections since being surveyed in 1895. Try to imagine what the virgin black soil was like in wet weather. The rail siding at Gindie was the main source of supply.
Okay.
This homestead, known as Sandhurst, was built for Frederick Samuel Daniels on his father Samuel Daniels' portion 2. Fred's home became the original mail receiving office in Gindie. By 12th of March 1898, Fred's wife Rhoda was the receiving officer. The school and homes were of similar designs of timber and corrugated iron, common to selectors everywhere at that time. After Samuel's death in 1901, the western half of Samuel's block where you are now was transferred to Fred. A blazed bruntwood tree, used as a surveyor's mark, a reference tree for the selection, still grows in the yard. It is corner 3 on the original survey plan. As there was very little road traffic, the original Gindie cricket pitch was the main road in front of the Sandhurst homestead. It is now the busy Gerrig Highway. The cricket pitch was later moved further south down the highway near Howards Road, but that does not exist now either. 4 of the 6 houses along the eastern side of the highway are now rented out.
Okay.
Portion 3 is the selection of Henry George Daniels, son of Henry John MLA. Like his father, Henry George never built on his block. After being purchased by the neighbouring Macmillan family, it became known as Plainfield and is now owned by descendants of Fred. When Henry George was selling this farm in May 1903, it was advertised as being the finest and most beautifully situated agricultural land in the whole Central District.
Right. Right.
After the Daniels' arrival, small selections were made available around the perimeter of the group settlement. The portions 15, 16, 17 and 11 along the southern side of Camel Creek were some of those. Portions 11 and 15 on the eastern and western sides of joining Henry George's block were the selections of Philip Ryan. He and his family travelled overland with the Daniels family to Gindie, as he was a relative of George's wife Joanna. 16 was the selection of R. Elliott. The blocks were too small on which to sustain an income, and Philip Ryan forfeited at least one of his blocks. After initially being transferred to Jeanette Macmillan, these areas are also currently owned by descendants of Fred Daniels. The larger portion, 19, further to the east, which adjoins Charles Daniels' portion 7, is now part of Bellevue and owned by the Curl family. Portion 20, also a larger block, originally selected by M. McMahon, also joins Henry's portion 6 and Charles's portion 7. At one time owned by Don Daniels, a descendant of James Daniels Sr., portion 20 is now owned by descendants of Fred. These blocks are not accessible from the highway or Glen Arena Road. On the opposite side of the road, a selection, possibly earlier than the above, but before the group settlement, had also been made by P.F. McDonald's Fernley's manager, John Ambrose Ryder. His brother, William Ryder, was the Under Home Secretary for Queensland at the time. Both John and his daughter Victoria, who attended the Gindie school at the time, died while residing in Gindie. For some time, owned and occupied by Flo Staunton and her family, a descendant of Jim Daniels, some of J.A. Ryder's Wattleside has recently been purchased by a descendant of Fred Daniels. It has been known as Galway Downs for many years.